Adventures of the Soul. Journeys through the physical and spiritual dimensions. Part 1. What is the soul? Chapter 1. Body, soul, and spirit. From the beginning of time, humankind has been on a quest to understand the concept of the soul. Through the generations, theologians, scholars, philosophers, and even musicians have attempted to describe it in an easily digestible manner for us mentally driven humans to comprehend. To this day, the terms soul and spirit are used interchangeably, without the true meaning of either being accurately presented or understood. Working as a messenger for the spirit world for the last 3 decades, I have also embarked on my own quest to find the correct definition of the soul and how the soul functions. Being a teacher and a role model for others, I think that this is imperative. When I sit in meditation, teach a class, or deliver messages from the other side, I often silently inquire of my guides and visiting spirits just how we humans can come closer to understanding the nature of the soul. It has been impressed upon me over and over again to think of it in terms of a Holy Trinity. I know that sounds religious, but I think that it's only spirit using terminology that is already in my brain file. Since I'm not a scientist or mathematician, spirit wouldn't be giving me formulas that I don't understand. Neither am I an engineer or a theologian. I'm just a guy from Queens who happened to be raised Catholic. But the concept of the Holy Trinity that comes to me in meditation and study is totally different from the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit I was taught in catechism. If I had to make an analogy, I would say that Father is spirit, Son is the body, and Holy Spirit is the soul. Mother and daughter could easily be substituted for father and son, but the patriarchal language is what most of us are familiar with due to centuries of tradition. I'd like to start off the book by exploring the connection between body, soul, and spirit. The body, spirit as soul. The body is the part of us that grows from an embryo and becomes a machine composed of cells, organs, and muscles. It is what we wash and dress and feed and sustain. Just like a car, the better you maintain it, the longer, hopefully, it will serve you and remain efficient. Sometime between conception and birth, spirit enters the body as a soul. The soul is spirit incarnate. Don't think of yourself as a body that has a soul, but rather as spirit that needs a body. Spirit permeates everything, and in me, in this body I call James Van Praagh, it is my soul. While on earth, I am spirit that requires physical form in this dimension so I can experience conditions and learn lessons that other realms don't provide. I enjoy food, art, literature, music, and other things that speak to or feed my soul. My soul experiences love, hate, betrayal, sympathy, forgiveness, empathy. You name it. Earth is a schoolroom, and the soul is the student. The soul, our eternal, interdimensional self. My soul is unique to me, but at the same time, it is a part of the whole and connected to everything. That connection is filtered through our physical senses, so it may not seem like it is always there. The emotion that we call love enables us to feel this connection, and extraordinary circumstances, such as the events of September 11th, can certainly make us feel it as well. We are all the same energy, but Earth provides us with so many different physical guises that sometimes it's difficult to acknowledge that truth. We often hear people say, "I am God," and it's true, our souls are spirit, God, Allah, the divine, whatever you choose to call it, on earth. Our bodies are limited by the constraints of the physical dimension, but our souls are outside of linear space and time and transcend our physical selves. The soul is the unique core of our self and the consciousness of who we are. It has crossed many oceans of lifetimes, experiences, and expressions of being. It's filled with infinite creative possibilities to manifest itself, and it's distinct in its own development and expression. The mediumistic term I choose to use when I'm communicating with a discarnate being is soul-to-soul communication. I was once discussing the idea of the soul with my good friend Debbie Ford, the great life coach and developer of the shadow process. She described the soul as that part of us that never dies. It carries all the messages and lessons of the past and will carry all the messages and lessons into the future. I loved that. I told her that in my work, once a soul returns home to the spirit world, it is the soul and not spirit that I am able to communicate with. This is a very important distinction. Not long after that conversation, my dear Debbie made the transition, but I am still able to receive messages from her. Although she was emotionally conflicted about leaving her son, other family members, and friends in the physical, the first thing she said to me about her transition was, "Oh my! It was so easy." The spiritual realms. The soul carries within it all the memories of our physical experiences through eons of time and existence. But when we transit into the spiritual realms, our consciousness is open to not only the enormous wholeness of our own particular soul, but the vast awareness of spirit. I love the Bible verse of John 14 verse 2, "In my Father's house are many mansions." I believe this to mean the different planes within the spiritual realms that our souls are drawn to, after the death of the human body, based upon our earthly thoughts and words and deeds. These include the astral planes, the mental planes, and the celestial planes. Your personality, memory, and mind are all contained in your astral body. When your physical body dies, the real you is still in your astral body, and it becomes aware of life outside the human body in the astral plane to which your earthly acts have drawn you. The lowest astral plane draws the least evolved souls, those who have not learned the lessons of love and respect. The intermediate astral plane draws in those who need rest and rehabilitation after a long physical disease, traumatic experiences, or inflexible beliefs. The highest astral plane is what we humans would call heaven, a place of opportunity for souls to grow in spiritual consciousness. The soul will eventually decide whether to return to the earth plane for more experience or to venture onto the mental plane. This level offers unlimited development of the individual soul. There is access to the accumulated wisdom of the ages. The highest realm is the celestial plane. Here is where the individual soul becomes one with all universal life. Christ, Buddha, and other great spiritual leaders are here. I wish I could articulate what Debbie and countless other souls have shared with me about the realms of spirit, which is our natural state and our true home. But I have only a human brain while on earth, and it can comprehend only this dimension. Human words can't describe the love and peace we feel after we've shuffled off this mortal coil. Being a combination of our mental, emotional, and physical bodies, the soul not only is made up of all our earthly memories, but comprises the entire scope of who and what we are, not just what we perceive as life in the physical dimension, but our eternal, interdimensional being. When the soul rejoins spirit, it becomes very aware of how it lived in the most recent lifetime and the impact that it had on other souls. The soul is also the repository of wisdom, love, and experiences gleaned from lifetime to lifetime. Everything we have ever experienced is kept in the soul memory. The spirit, the divine spark. Spirit comes from the Latin word spiritus, meaning breath. When I think of spirit, I think of the essence, the energy, the divine spark, that animates and ignites our souls. Our spirit is the highest form or aspect of who we are and is devoid of any human personality or character. It is the oneness of all things. You've heard the term breath of God, which means spirit, and it is that which animates our souls and, in turn, lets them express themselves in the physical body. There is only one source energy, and that is spirit. Many call it God, but that word has a religious tone that turns some people off. Religious history has transformed spirit into an old, bearded man who judges and blesses according to whim, but nothing could be further from the truth. In catechism, I remember being told by the nuns that God is everywhere. Of course, I now know that to be true, but as a young child, I could think only of an old man watching over my shoulder and judging. Not fun. I now realize that I'm God, my dog is God, every plant in my garden is God, every insect in my garden is God, and the air I breathe is God. The word God has been burdened with the religious connotation of an omnipotent being that is separate from and greater than us. I don't believe that. I've been making an effort to use the word one now instead when I am speaking about God. It's an acronym that I created that stands for Omnipresent Nurturing Energy. When someone says I believe in God or God is dead, the conversation then has to go to the semantics or definition of what the person thinks God is. To me, God is an energy and I am made of it. I am not separate from God, and neither is anything you see. Atheism is the rejection of the belief in deities. I don't believe in deities, but I wouldn't label myself an atheist. I believe in a loving energy that permeates and animates everything. People who believe in that energy and people who believe in the Old Testament God use the same word, and that's where we run into confusion and conflict. Choices and lessons. As our souls are stimulated by spirit, or the One, it expresses itself through the physical body. This expression is seen by the choices we make in our lives. As we look around our world, we can see the myriad choices and expressions various souls can decide on. No two souls are alike, but at the core, they are the same. All souls have had different life experiences, and in a way, those experiences shape our outlook on life and the various ways to live it. Souls can express themselves through a life of compassion, tolerance, judgment, or violence. Again, this physical world is our schoolroom, a place for the soul to live out and learn from human experiences, and as we live them out, these curricula mold us accordingly. When the soul has finished learning its lessons, it returns back home to spirit, and as the soul leaves this physical dimension, the spirit energy remains fully intact. I often think of Glinda, the good witch from The Wizard of Oz, when I contemplate the soul returning to spirit. Remember the image of Glinda inside her bubble, traveling up, up, and away. Think of Glinda as your soul and spirit as the bubble as you make the journey home. The soul returns to spirit, and just as the body is an expression of the soul, so too is the soul an expression of spirit. The meaning of spirituality. I'm often asked if the work I do has opened me up to my own sense of spirituality. Of course it has. There is no way I could be personally involved with this type of work and not receive the essence of love as souls come back and share memories that they have lived with their loved ones. At the same time, it is important to note that just because someone claims to be a medium or psychic, it doesn't necessarily mean he or she is spiritual. The medium may deliver facts and evidence from the deceased, but unless that person is attentive to the spiritual energy coming through, the recipient isn't getting the wholeness of the message. The recipient is left with a half-baked reading, and unfortunately, the intent and wholeness of the communication is absent. What a shame for the spirit, who wanted to make sure that loved ones received not only evidence but the full emotional message, which is sometimes more important than the evidential proof that consciousness survives the death of the brain. How do people know when they are living their own spirituality? They need to be aware that they're aligning themselves with a power that is much bigger than their personality, but at the same time bringing a strong sense of their self and their place in the scheme of things. Do they have a sense of mindfulness that goes beyond their personality and nurtures a strong sense of self? My husband, Brian, is a great barometer for this. Even though he is not a professional in the spiritual community, he has a good sense of whether someone who is a spiritual teacher walks his or her talk. If a professional stands in front of hundreds of people at an event and speaks about mindfulness, but later when we all have dinner together, that person is rude to the waitress, Brian checks out. He has no tolerance for people who don't practice what they preach. Awakening to spirit. Part of my life work is not only to demonstrate that there is no such thing as death, but also to assist others in waking up to their spiritual side. When people live lives of spiritual awareness and mindfulness, everything they do and say can change the lives of others. Those random acts of kindness can alter someone's attitude. On a larger scale, the spiritual awareness of teachers I admire, like Doreen Virtue, Oprah Winfrey, and Deepak Chopra, can change millions. When we are touched by spirit in a big way, I've heard this referred to as a peak event. Such an experience is often described as a transcendent moment of remembering. The veil has been lifted and a nugget of truth enters our consciousness. A new piece of information fits into place and seems right. Oprah calls these aha moments. These experiences are events that open your soul up to your spiritual heritage and remind you of who you truly are. When you're filled with spirit, you feel a connectedness and oneness with everyone. Your soul will have a sense of joy and peace, with a focus on service to others. Inspire equals in spirit. I love the word inspire. I often tell my students that to be inspired is a true gift, and I share exercises to help them to tune into their own inspiration. Inspire means in spirit, so when people are connected to this great energy, they're creative and limitless. They're attuned to spirit via the soul. Countless innovators, inventors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs use meditation to tap into the infinite wisdom of the source. Spirituality assists you in making sense of the world and who you are. It connects you with the profoundly powerful and divine force of the universe. No matter what life's work you're involved in, if you are inspired, you're on the right soul path. If you're looking for worldly success, abundance, inner peace, or enlightenment, no knowledge can propel you to achieve your goals as much as spiritual knowledge. My hope is that this book will inspire you to seek spiritual knowledge within yourself. You can be a well-read spiritual scholar, but unless you apply the concepts of love, compassion, and empathy to your daily life, all that book learning is for naught. In Unfinished Business, I talk about how I am drawn to the story of Helen Keller. I see her life as a metaphor for spiritual awakening. As an infant, Helen became blind and deaf, and spent the rest of her life in darkness and silence. Her teacher, Annie Sullivan, was summoned by Helen's parents to try to break through that formidable barrier. Annie would fingerspell to Helen and try to make the child understand that what she was spelling meant a particular thing, like doll or cake. When Helen finally makes the connection at the water pump as Annie spells WATR, it truly is an inspirational moment. If you haven't seen The Miracle Worker with Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke, I urge you to do so. At the end of the movie, Annie fingerspells into Helen's hand, "I love Helen." The first time I watched this scene, I thought, yikes. Making the connection between a physical object and a hand sign is one thing, but what about intangible concepts, like love? If Helen couldn't physically touch love, how in the world was she to be able not only to make the connection, but to live it? Of course, Helen rose to the occasion and became one of my favorite enlightened teachers, but the progression from a child ensconced in darkness and silence who ate off people's plates for sustenance to an inspirational icon and wonderful spiritual philosopher is a great metaphor for the evolution of all human souls. It was a life filled with peak events. Religion versus spirituality. Many people ask me about the difference between being religious and being spiritual. I think that difference is significant. Religion is a man-made, organized belief system consisting of various creeds, teachings, rituals, and documents and usually, but not always, revolves around a deity of some kind. If people follow a specific belief system, it is their conviction that this is how they will receive a greater position on the other side. In contrast, spirituality is the very personal search to find the greater meaning in life and one's existence in this world. It doesn't have to involve rituals or written words and may encompass having a love for a divine source, or God, and learning to use this all-encompassing energy in every situation. In being spiritual, you have a respect and love for self and an understanding of your connection to others. There are many paths to reach the place where you treat yourself and others with kindness and feel at peace. I know many self-identified atheists who are kinder people than some spiritual or religious people, and vice versa. It's all about constructing a belief system that works for you, makes you the best person you can possibly be, and encourages you to treat others with honor. There is not one correct way. I often say that all religions have bits of the truth, but no one religion has all of the truth. If the holy texts of the world's religions are not viewed through the lens of love and acceptance, it does the authors a great disservice. The one element of religion I don't like, and this is a general statement, is that some people believe that their way is the only way. Unfortunately, many of the world's wars are based upon a sense that a certain belief system is the only true word of God. It sets up a sense of us against them. Where religion talks a lot about God, the idea of spirituality is to practice the higher ideals that we associate with God in our daily life. Spirituality is a very personal journey, but the destination is always the same: love. The mass exodus from organized religion in the past few decades points to the desire people have to ask questions instead of being told answers, to doubt dogma without risk of condemnation, and to feel free to be themselves without judgment. Our planet furnishes spirit with such a diverse mix of human stories that it's a shame some people want everyone to be just like them. The human desire to judge is strong, but if we all understood that each of us has our own unique path, wouldn't Earth be a much better place? Chapter 2: Consciousness, Energy, and the Power of Thought. Just as Helen Keller surely struggled to define the things she couldn't physically touch, so do we humans struggle with the concept of consciousness. A debate rages to this day over whether consciousness is a product of the brain or if the brain is merely a receiver for consciousness that already exists. When a brain dies, does that consciousness cease to exist? Or does its energy continue on even after the brain is no longer functioning? One side of the debate wants proof and tests, while the other side just accepts that energy doesn't die. Well, it's no surprise what I, as a medium, believe, since the consciousness is what I tap into long after the brain is no longer alive. There's no debate for me since I can't deny what I actually experience. An easy analogy is a ham radio. It's a complex machine of wires, but it's simply a box with no purpose unless there are radio waves. After the ham radio ceases to work, or dies, the radio waves are still there. Everything that the ham radio has ever received or sent out is still out there as energy. The mystery of consciousness. Let's back up and try out a working definition. Consciousness is the awareness of being. It's the sense of being a part of all there is. This sense of being changes from moment to moment. Therefore, there are many levels of consciousness. As you're reading this book, you're conscious of the feel of the pages, of scanning and absorbing the words, of the sounds and smells in your environment, and perhaps of one or two random thoughts passing through your mind. This is your consciousness or awareness at this moment. It flows easily from one moment to the next, and the awareness is obviously external or internal. Throughout recorded history, humans have sought to define consciousness, and of course, there are many theories and beliefs as to what it actually is. I don't happen to think that the reality of consciousness is a knowable thing while we're down here on Earth using our physical brains. We certainly can get glimmers or pieces of the puzzle, and it's enthralling to share ideas and hypotheses, but after all is said and done, the concept is not definable. It's much too big for us humans to comprehend. Raising our consciousness. That certainly doesn't mean that tools to help us elevate our consciousness don't exist. One trick I use is drawing a picture of a skyscraper and taping it on my bathroom mirror. I then label the different floors with emotions that I resonate with. For instance, my bottom floor is marked fear, and as the building rises, I have guilt, pity, acceptance, service, joy, peace, and love. Every morning as I brush my teeth or shave, I assess what my day might hold, and I find what floor I'm on. And then I make a concerted effort to advance to the next highest floor. I try to live that day at that level. Let's say that I've just read a rude comment on my Facebook page or YouTube channel. I might be feeling pity that I'm misunderstood. I consciously decide to accept that I am on this planet to serve, because that brings me joy. I have already made myself feel better in the time it takes me to brush my teeth. I also use the image of my skyscraper when I meditate. Much as people can sit in silence and lower their blood pressure, as studies in meditation have shown, I visualize my skyscraper and try to elevate my consciousness. As a start, see what levels your thoughts and behaviors seem to fall into. It is a rare person indeed who can consistently remain in the upper levels, and you should never judge yourself against others. The goal is to raise your own consciousness, not make it a competition. Everyone's levels will fluctuate according to what's going on in their lives. I also use this visualization to help me better understand what drives people and why they make specific choices. Most important, what can we do to raise our consciousness to a higher level? Remember that everything around us can affect our level of consciousness: the books we read, the music we listen to, the television shows we watch, the company we keep, and what we do in our spare time. Try drawing a skyscraper of your own, and make the emotions personal to you. Imagine what the world would be like if every person, every morning, made a conscious effort to push the up button of the elevator of their skyscraper. Energy never dies. When I first started doing spiritual work about 30 years ago, I always discussed the concept of energy with my clients. I would tell them that everything is energy, and it's always in constant motion. The molecules in dense things move slowly, in lighter things they move faster. When I used to broach the subject of energy decades ago, people would look at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Nowadays, the subject of energy has gone mainstream. I like you. You've got good energy. The realtor showed me a house with bad feng shui. Send me some positive energy during my interview. Your boyfriend has a creepy vibe. The good energy you give out, you'll get back. You thought so, too. We must be on the same wavelength. The theories about energy change as quickly as technology. The professionals can't keep up, much less the average Joe. I'm certainly no scientist, so all I can tell you is what I believe: energy never dies, but it can change form. I also believe that quantum mechanics and spirituality will eventually meet, and that what we've all been saying about God is everywhere will be validated. We're just putting it in lay terms. Quantum energy, science meets spirituality. Quantum mechanics has fascinating things to say about energy, for example, that subatomic particles can be in multiple places at the same time and don't follow just one path. And since everything we perceive as real is made of atoms, the same laws would apply to what we call the material world. The divine force, or God, actually exists, and it certainly isn't a judgmental, old bearded man sitting on a throne in the clouds. It's a benign energy that permeates everything and everyone. Energy is a concept that's been around since recorded time. Ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians used it for healing. Pick up any book about the pharaohs and you'll notice that they're gripping cylinder-like objects. These cylinders, one made of copper and the other of zinc, were harmonizers of the two basic flows of human energy, which they called Ba and Ka, corresponding to the yin and yang of Eastern tradition. The Chinese mapped specific energy meridians in the body to strengthen and heal. We commonly know this as acupuncture. Many native traditions and shamans recognize the relationship between energy and the body in the context of healing. Modern science doesn't yet have a way to reliably detect this energy, but brilliant minds, like Amit Goswami, Ph.D., are on the leading edge of the science/consciousness confluence. Dr. Goswami has been called the father of modern quantum theory and is a leading figure in the scientific community who believes in the existence of a spiritual dimension. If you haven't seen the documentary The Quantum Activist, I highly recommend it. It is the story of Dr. Goswami's journey into the spiritual to explain the seemingly inexplicable findings of quantum experiments. I personally find that the trouble that science and spirituality have in reaching common ground is one of semantics. When one person says the word God, another person may automatically tune out, thinking that it is the Old Testament God. It would be great if we could agree on a word that means the energy of everything, a benevolent force that doesn't have the connotations of an overseer or a deity. Dr. Goswami defines God as consciousness in its creative aspect. That's a lovely definition, but I'm still waiting for the terms that science and the layperson can bring to the table and make each other understood. There are extremists on both sides rattling their swords, and the rest of us in the middle continue to wonder what all the fuss is about. Perceiving energy. My senses are very open to perceiving energy. As a psychic, I know whether I can trust someone from the moment I meet him or her. Friends ask me to go house hunting with them because I will know if the home is right for them. As a medium, I must raise my slow earth vibration higher so that I can communicate with disincarnate beings, whose vibration is very fast. They must slow their vibration down, and we meet in the middle. Medium, get it? If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, everyone is psychic to a certain degree. We're all able to perceive energy in the form of premonitions, gut feelings, and intuition. It just takes practice to develop it. Meditation is the first step, and I've written some guided meditations for you that are at the back of the book. The energy I use and tap into in order to do my psychic work is exactly the same as yours. I've just had more experience discerning it. A question I'm asked a lot at my seminars concerns the difference between the source energy and spirit energy. I tell them it's the same, but when it's in physical form, we commonly refer to it as the soul. An analogy I use is the following: envision the source energy, also called cosmic, God, and divine energy, as a vast unending ocean. If some of that water is poured into a vessel or vase, or human, it's still the same water, but it is more confined and limited. When the human body dies, the water is returned to the vast ocean from whence it came. The power of thought. All energy can change its character based on our thoughts. Thoughts affect and alter energy. Everything we see first originated as a thought, the great painter of the world. As a medium, I've intuited many times that all physical matter on earth derives from a higher mental level. Each work of art, each invention, every new medical breakthrough was first created in the spiritual realms and eventually trickled down to a recipient as inspiration or droplets of God. Clients frequently say to me, "Tell my mom I love her." And I reply, "You can tell her. She hears you." Souls are very alive in heaven or in the spirit world. They live in a dimension that is all thought. They can communicate with each other and oftentimes with their loved ones who are still in the physical. We humans often say things to each other like "I thought of my dad today." We think we are the originator of the thought. Did you ever consider that perhaps it's your loved one impressing a thought into your consciousness to let you know that he or she is around? Your loved ones who have made the transition can hear your thoughts loud and clear. They often describe the thought as brilliantly colored if it's a loving one, but if it's a fear-based thought, it is seen as dark and dull. This is why whenever I teach a class, the first thing I advise the students to do is take responsibility for the thoughts that they create, because thoughts are real and can have a profound impact on every aspect of their lives. It's difficult for us humans to lend credence to the idea that a thought is a real thing, because we are unable to see it. But we know that there are many waves darting through the air, such as sound waves, microwaves, and radio waves. We take for granted that they exist even though we don't see them. When you consider your thoughts, know that they are as real to the subconscious of the person you're thinking about as if you picked up your cell phone and said them out loud. Take responsibility for your thoughts, they're not just yours. They go shooting out of you to the intended target just like arrows. That's why meditation is so relaxing, your archers can take a break. Thoughts are creative energy, and they carve, create, and forge your future destiny. Right now, as you read and absorb these words, the experience you're living is a sum total of all the thoughts you've ever had. This is the reality you've created for yourself based upon your thoughts. Some of these you remember, and some you don't. But it's not possible to think one thing and live another. If you want harmony in your life, you must have harmony in your thoughts. Energy emotion. The major fuel that gives a thought focus and energy is emotion. Every time I communicate with the spirit dimension, it is with thought. But the most incredible messages I am able to receive are the ones that are accompanied with strong emotion. When I demonstrate spirit communication at large events, I don't pick people out of the crowd. My guides are with me, communicating with the departed loved ones who want to make contact, and my guides gravitate to those souls who express emotion. Everyone has spirit guides, and they can change with our earthly circumstances. We have personal guides, who are people we've known in the physical dimension. Mastery guides, who are drawn to us based on certain activities we're currently engaged in. Master teachers, who are very evolved and may never have incarnated on this physical plane. The guides who are usually with me during my mediumship work are Harry Aldrich, who was a doctor in London in the 1930s, and Chang, who is my master teacher and hasn't incarnated for many decades. My mother, Regina, who passed from the physical in the 1980s, also assists me. If a thought like my daughter is in the audience. "I died when I fell off a ladder" comes into my mind during a reading, it doesn't resonate with me as much as the thought my daughter is in the audience. I was never able to tell her I love her in life, but I want to now. The thought suddenly becomes alive, and it's easier for me to pick up the wholeness of the emotional message. The stronger the emotion you put into a thought, the more life and creativity you are giving it. If you add motivation and intent behind the emotional thought, you're adding an extra boost of fuel, making it more direct and focused. Now, once you get the hang of that, throw in the best ingredient of all, love. Love is actually spirit energy, it permeates everything, but here in the physical dimension, we don't always access that energy. The objective of this book is to help you realize that manifesting the energy of love is your most important assignment on earth. So if you back your thought with love, there's no stopping it. A very good habit to get into when you wake up in the morning is to create an intention and send that thought out with love. If you get into this routine, I guarantee that your life will change. I include some affirmations and meditations in this book that you can use for this purpose. The last thing I want to share with you in this chapter is to keep your thoughts focused on what you have instead of what you don't have. If you send a message out to the universe that there is lack, the universe will make sure that lack is amplified. Whatever your focus is, the universe will provide. God says yes, the ego says no. Think positively, because positive thinking is more in alignment with your soul. Negative thinking will bring confusion and bitterness. Remind yourself several times a day to bring your mind to a positive place and send that positivity out. Chapter 3. Near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, astral projection, and remote viewing. Every one of us has an innate curiosity about who and what we are. We wonder why we're on this planet and where we come from. We also share a desire to understand where we go after we die. If we accept the law of physics that says energy cannot be destroyed, where does ours go? And does the energy that departs our bodies retain memories and emotions? Does our personal consciousness survive without a body and brain? These are all very heady questions that have preoccupied humans since the dawn of time. The rational person would say, I guess I won't really know until I die. And up until recently, we haven't had a whole lot of testimony from people who have died and come back to tell us about it. I'm sure the near-death experience has happened to countless people throughout history, but it hasn't been until past few years that they've felt comfortable relating their experiences, for fear of being called delusional, crazy, or liars. Even while writing her groundbreaking work on bereavement called On Death and Dying, published in 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was dissuaded from including a chapter on patients who had died and returned to tell of it, because her publisher was afraid she would become a laughingstock. Against her better judgment, she left out all that information she had garnered, because she didn't want her bereavement work to suffer from what many considered quackery. We all have a sense sometimes that our souls exist outside space and time as we know it. But there are millions of people whose souls have left the boundaries of the physical world and have come back to share with us their experiences in a dimension much bigger, more intricate, more beautiful, and more loving than we could ever fathom. I've often thought it would be like returning from a trip to Tahiti and trying to explain your experience to your cat. Near-death experiences. Near-death experience, or NDE, is a term coined by Raymond Moody in his great book Life After Life. NDEs are experiencing a surge in the media right now as more and more people seem accepting of the concept. Not only are there popular books by regular folks like Betty Eadie and my friend Dan Ion Brinkley, but several prominent physicians and scientists have also written hugely successful books on the topic. One is Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences, by Jeffrey Long, MD, with Paul Perry, and another is Proof of Heaven, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife, by Eben Alexander, M.D. Dr. Alexander is an American neurosurgeon who fell into a coma caused by E. coli bacterial meningitis. While unconscious with his neocortex basically offline, Dr. Alexander had a variation of the typical NDE, and what I mean by a typical NDE is a sense of peace and painlessness, a feeling of unconditional love, and being met by loved ones who preceded us in the death process. But what was atypical was that he was greeted by a stranger, instead of his father, who had passed recently, or another loved one he recognized. After his recovery, Dr. Alexander, who had been adopted, later discovered that the woman in his NDE was actually his biological sister, who had died some years before. He had never seen a photograph of her, but after his recovery, he recognized her instantly as his guide during the NDE. I find Dr. Alexander's story very compelling. Of course, the skeptic community was, to put it mildly, skeptical. I have no reason to doubt the veracity of Dr. Alexander's story, but the skeptics would have you think he is lying just to make a buck on a book. First of all, I think Dr. Alexander, an established neurosurgeon, would have more to lose by coming out with his story, and second, as a neurosurgeon, he probably was not hurting for money either. I think it was more a case of the skeptics experiencing cognitive dissonance reduction, which is a fancy way of saying that if something doesn't fit into your established paradigm of how the world operates, then the importance of that something must be reduced. Meaning that if a person survives a NDE and tells the story of an afterlife, and you don't personally believe in an afterlife, then either the person has to be crazy or lying, or there is some scientific or medical explanation for it. I have much more respect for someone who says, "I don't have an explanation for that," than someone who immediately resorts to name-calling and mean-spiritedness. I was also flabbergasted to learn that among the harshest critics of survivors of NDEs are not the skeptic or scientific community, that is to be expected, but instead are some members of the religious community who believe that only those of their own faith are accepted on the other side with love and compassion. My NDE. Back in 2008, I had an incredible life-changing experience, a mini NDE, if you will, which I recount in my workshops. I had been in Los Angeles attending meetings, and I stopped at a neighborhood deli for a salad. Later that night at the hotel, I was violently sick and came to the realization that I had food poisoning. I drove home immediately, which was a 90-minute drive, stopping occasionally on the shoulder of the freeway to heave. I called Brian, who was at work, to come home and take care of me. I called my doctor, and she prescribed an anti-nausea medication and told me to stay hydrated and ride it out. The medication didn't work. Even though I wasn't eating, every hour I had to run to the bathroom to empty my stomach. I told Brian and my doctor that there was blood in my vomit. Neither of them seemed too concerned about my statement since that is not uncommon with food poisoning. I guess I should have been more specific, but in my sickened state I wasn't thinking correctly. Instead of saying, "There is blood in my vomit," I should have said, "My vomit is blood." On my last trip to the bathroom, I passed out and fell to the floor before reaching the toilet. Blood rushed up my esophagus and out of my mouth, covering the floor. Brian later said it looked like a murder scene. Needless to say, he promptly called 911. In the meantime, I had popped out of my body and was looking down at the scene. I had the strange sensation of being out of time. I knew that I wasn't in my body, but I also knew that I was not dead. As I hovered near the bathroom ceiling, my cousin Patricia, who had completed suicide 30 years before, appeared up there with me. I asked her telepathically what was going on. She comforted me and said, "It will all be over soon." My first thought was, "Pat, can you be more specific? Do you mean my life will be over soon, or this experience will be over soon?" Patricia disappeared, and I became aware of a ribbon coming out of the top of my head that was connected to a sort of tapestry. I could see that if I showed fear, the ribbon would alter the tapestry, turning it a murky color. If I felt peace, the ribbon changed color, and in turn changed the tapestry to a lighter pastel. I became aware that my tapestry was connected to a larger matrix, which I sensed everyone else was attached to by their own ribbons. I had the realization that at the time of death, we are able to look over the tapestries that we have created and see how our personal tapestry fused with and altered the larger human tapestry. I'd never been aware of this tapestry before, but I've often used it in my daily meditation since then. As we pass out of the physical, I believe that we can see if we have left behind a piece of art or if we have left behind something that has made the human tapestry less beautiful. The tapestry disappeared, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a garden in the distance and a lone figure picking flowers. I walked toward it, and as I approached, I recognized the figure as my father, who had transitioned a few years prior, but he appeared to be about 30 years old. He smiled at me and extended a flower and said, "It's not your time yet." The next thing I knew, I was on my bathroom floor, with Brian crying out my name. The paramedics arrived shortly, and I was taken to the hospital, where I was diagnosed with a Mallory-Weiss tear. Basically, I had retched so much from the food poisoning that I tore the lining of my esophagus, and my stomach would continually fill up with blood that trickled down from the tear. I would throw up the blood and feel better, and then it would fill up with blood again, which would make me nauseated, and it would start all over again. I was basically bleeding out. 7 days in the hospital and many blood transfusions later, I was able to return home. If Brian hadn't been there, I probably would have died on the bathroom floor. Remember the skyscraper I use as a meditation to elevate my consciousness? I believe that meditation can affect the human tapestry that I saw in my NDE. The more people who are thinking positive, loving thoughts, the brighter and more vibrant their personal tapestries become, which in turn makes the overall human tapestry thrive. Everyone is responsible for their own tapestry, and the more of us who lead mindful lives, the more we stay in the upper levels of our skyscraper and the more brilliantly the tapestry shines. Since my NDE, I have done some research, and I discovered that besides the feelings of peace and love that survivors experience, many people have observed a web-like matrix of interconnecting lights existing above and around humans. I think this matrix might be what is commonly referred to as the Akashic Records, an energetic imprint of every thought, action, emotion, and experience that has ever occurred. Sometimes called the collective consciousness or the Book of Life, it's the vibrational record of every soul and its journey. Everyone has the power and right to access the Akashic Records because, as souls, we are the records. The American mystic Edgar Cayce, 1877–1945, was able to use his subconscious mind to tap into the Akashic Records, an infinite number of other subconscious minds, and interpret them through his objective mind in order to effect healings. In other words, Casey was able to go into a self-induced sleep-like state, tap into the wisdom of cosmic mind, and, even though he had no medical training whatsoever, impart remedies that helped thousands. The majority consensus of survivors of NDEs is that they are unable to deny that their consciousness survives outside of their bodies, that we are able to be fully aware and awake yet not be inside a body. It's life-changing, to say the least. People reprioritize their lives, become more loving, more positive, and more giving. People who live with someone who's had an NDE can't help but change themselves, so the benefits of an NDE become a shared experience. The good news is that anyone can reap these benefits without having to die and come back, because an out-of-body experience is a form of NDE, and it can be accomplished with practice and training. Out-of-body experiences. The term out-of-body experience, or OBE, was first introduced in 1943 by George N. M. Tyrrell and later recorded in his book Apparitions, but it was Robert Monroe who popularized the term. Monroe, a broadcaster by profession, became interested in the effects of sound patterns on consciousness in 1956, and he became a pioneer in the field of learning during sleep. If you were like me as a young adult, you probably had several cassettes, with subjects like abundance, motivation, and decreasing bad habits, by your bedside that you would pop into the tape player as you went to bed. That was one of the legacies of Robert Monroe. Monroe became one of his own test subjects, and during his investigation, he began to experience a state of consciousness separate and apart from his body. These spontaneous occurrences significantly changed the focus of his research. He described this state as an out-of-body experience, and a new field in the study of consciousness was born. In 1971, he published Journeys Out of the Body, which to this day remains the Bible of OBEs. He continued to study and research this phenomenon, and he later opened a center in Virginia called the Monroe Institute. Tens of thousands of students have attended the Monroe Institute, for various reasons, to create purpose and meaning in life, to explore consciousness outside of space and time, to tap into personal healing potentials, and much more. One of the classes taught at the Institute that intrigues me is called Lifeline. I first learned of it while watching a TV show on the Bio channel called The Unexplained. Human subjects are taught to not only travel outside of their physical bodies but also guide disincarnates that have exited physical existence and have not made the complete transition to the astral dimension. The theory works on the premise that some lost souls vibrate at such a slow rate that they're not able to see spirit helpers, who are vibrating much faster, who are there to chaperone them. It takes a human, having an OBE at a slower vibration, to help guide the trapped spirit to the light. It is also called soul rescue. There are many people who have spontaneous OBEs, but they can train and learn to control them. Most people can develop the ability to initiate an OBE, and many become aware of an increase in other psychic abilities. The benefits of practicing OBEs are as myriad as the students themselves. They include a profound sense of knowing versus believing, obtaining personal answers, decreasing the fear of death, experiencing past lives, encountering disincarnate beings and guides. There are various ways to initiate an OBE, but the most common involve a relaxed state between consciousness and sleep and intent to leave the physical body. Intent is the key word here, since you may have the intent to meditate for a particular reason and/or the intent to leave the body for a particular reason. Astral projection. As I understand it, an OBE is a generic term for any time the consciousness leaves the physical body. Astral projection is a form of OBE, but with travel to other dimensions as the distinguishing feature. If you're looking at your body from the ceiling of your bedroom, that would be an OBE, but if you travel to higher realms, that would be astral projection. The intent of your OBE would be to travel into the dimensions closest to Earth, known as the astral planes, said to be the first level the soul will go to upon death of the physical body or during an NDE. When a soul enters it, the colors, sounds, and emotions are so unlike what we experience on Earth that survivors of NDEs have no words to describe it. Practitioners who astral project are connected to their physical bodies by what is known as the silver cord, much like the tether for an astronaut who is spacewalking or an umbilical cord. During an NDE, you are tied to the physical body, but if the cord is broken, there is no returning. You should have no fear of the silver cord breaking during a conscious OBE or astral projection. It is only during an NDE that the connection can be broken if the human body is released. At night during our sleep state, our astral body, connected by the silver cord, can travel the astral planes spontaneously. We can visit our loved ones who have made the transition, and we can seek counsel from our guides and teachers. This is where the phrase "let me sleep on it" becomes clear. If we're having a difficult time with an earthly problem, how does sleep help us come to a proper decision? Through the advice we get from astral beings, of course. In the morning when we wake up, the conscious mind doesn't recall the visits, but the advice that was given to our subconscious seems to make the decision much easier. Sometimes we will recall having interactions with our departed loved ones, which can also have a very calming effect. If we're having a difficult time with an earthly problem, how does sleep help us come to a proper decision? Through the advice we get from astral beings, of course. In the morning when we wake up, the conscious mind doesn't recall the visits, but the advice that was given to our subconscious seems to make the decision much easier. Sometimes we will recall having interactions with our departed loved ones, which can also have a very calming effect. In order to consciously astral project, we must have awareness or a sense that there is a place beyond this three-dimensional world, which we experience with our human bodies/shells, that we're able to visit with our astral bodies. The astral body is an exact replica of the human body, but the energy isn't dense and we're able to travel to other dimensions with our consciousness intact. To become adept at astral projection can take a lot of practice. Meditation, relaxation, intention, and absence of fear are key. Many people have asked me if drugs, such as LSD, can elicit an OBE. I have never tried LSD, so it's not a recommendation I am comfortable making. I did, however, have an experience with ayahuasca, which is a brew made from the combination of leaves of a particular plant and a vine, which contains a substance that allows ayahuasca to be efficacious when taken orally, found in the Amazon rainforest. It was a ceremonial setting, and I was there with several experienced shamans, so I felt comfortable. I was leading a spiritual excursion through Brazil, which is a country I love, and we were invited by the leaders of a religion called Santo Daime to attend a ceremony where ayahuasca, or grandmother medicine, would be used. I purposely left the group for a day to experience the ceremony alone before I could recommend it to anyone. Lasting 8 hours, it involved not only the ceremonial drinking of the tea but also drumming and chanting. The leaders, knowing that I was a famous medium from the United States, had invited several Brazilian mediums to sit with us. I had a very profound and insightful experience, but afterward, I knew that I could recommend it only to a few of the participants who had traveled with me. It's not for everyone. There is a lot of purging that takes place, physically and emotionally. When I returned to the States, I did research on ayahuasca and discovered that it contains dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which is naturally produced in the pineal gland. But if ingested in controlled amounts, it can produce conscious travel outside of the body. There is a fascinating book called DMT, The Spirit Molecule, by Rick Strassman, as well as a documentary by the same name, and the super inquisitive TV host/comedian Joe Rogan talks about DMT on his always entertaining podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. A British writer named Graham Hancock gave a TEDx talk about consciousness and his experience with ayahuasca, and there was a huge brouhaha when the TED team pulled the video from YouTube. One side cried censorship, while the other called the talk pseudoscience, and the debate rages on. DMT is an illegal substance in most of the world, and for someone who is interested in astral projection, I would recommend contacting the Monroe Institute's website instead of seeking out a psychedelic. Remote viewing. The Monroe Institute also has a remote viewing program. Remote viewing allows a perceiver, the viewer, to describe or give details about a target that is inaccessible to the normal senses due to distance. Back in 2002, when I was hosting a daytime TV show called Beyond, I had an opportunity to meet with a remote viewer and put him to the test. We sent one of the show's producers to a secret location to act as the target. The remote viewer went into a room for 30 minutes with some paper and a pen to draw any shapes and/or write down any descriptions or impressions that came to him. The remote viewer was only given the target's name, nothing else that would influence him. After 30 minutes in silence, the remote viewer came back and showed the audience and me his results. He had drawn a picture of a staircase and said it was in constant motion. He wrote down that there was water, and it was also moving. Off to the left of the target, he drew a series of triangles with circles interspersed among them. He was totally correct. The producer was at a shopping mall, seated between an ornamental waterfall and a Christmas tree decorated with round ornaments, watching people on the escalator. I was duly impressed. In the 1970s, the United States military funded a program to investigate the contribution remote viewing could add to clandestine programs. It was top secret at the time and has been recently declassified. Called the Stargate Project, it officially ceased operation in 1995 after it was declared unsuccessful. The participants in the project begged to differ, however, and say that the program was ended because of the ridicule factor. Much like the position of Dr. Kubler-Ross's publisher, the stigma of anything that smacked of parapsychology was too controversial to stand behind. The major difference between remote viewing and an OBE is that remote viewing is a controlled shifting of awareness that is performed in a waking state of consciousness. The viewer is totally awake and responsive, with the mission to download information regarding a distant location. Half of your consciousness stays with you, and half of it goes to the target site to gather information. It's a skill, and anyone can achieve results with patience and practice. When you start to take the time to look inside of yourself and attempt to connect with the unseen world, only then can you begin to comprehend your soul for what it truly is. The mystery of life doesn't seem so mysterious if you venture inward and listen to your soul's voice. Our perception of reality is, unfortunately, filtered through our ego selves. We become lost and judge everything based on just 5 senses. When we look at the world around us, it may be our eyes that are viewing everything and our ears that are hearing everything, but it is our souls that are recording, memorizing, and cataloging each experience. If you train your mind to assimilate these experiences with love, tolerance, and giving, you are feeding your soul the proper nutrients for its health and evolution. Learn not to feed your soul the junk food of judgment and intolerance. If you consider yourself to be spiritual, then the tools to living a mindful life are obvious. But simply knowing the tools really means nothing unless you practice them. All the spiritual knowledge in the world is for naught unless you walk your talk.